Hello, welcome back everyone for our final session of the day, and I think it's the perfect way to end our day here at the Sun Valley Forum and actually our summer series on the security imperative to restore our natural systems. So a call for a natural security policy. Very pleased to have with us incredible leaders and experts on climate and broader environmental security issues. So Sherri, Johan, and Lisa, welcome. And very pleased to introduce our moderator for the day, Lisa Friedman. Lisa is a longtime friend and colleague in the climate field. First met when she was a reporter with EE News, Climate Wire, and all sorts of outlets, really the guru on the inside of the climate negotiations, federal policy, and is now, of course, at the New York Times. So pleased to have you in that august institution sharing your expertise. A little bit more on Lisa, and just encourage folks to read their full bios on the website for Sherri, Johan, and Lisa. Before Climate Wire, she was the Washington bureau chief for the Oakland Tribune and later the LA Daily News. And she and her husband own a pizzeria and bakery in Washington's Bloomingdale neighborhood, which I had no idea about. I love her addition to the bio. So welcome, Lisa. Welcome to our panel, and we'll give you an extra 10 minutes. So we'll get a full 30 minutes of expertise. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Amy. My husband does all the work, by the way, in the pizzeria. I just bring home the health insurance. I'm so pleased to moderate both this particular panel and also to be a part of the Sun Valley Forum. Amy, like she said, and I have known each other for years. I've been wanting for years to come out to Idaho and be part of these amazing panels that she puts on, as luck would have it, we're all available now, and and I'm thrilled to have been able to do this online, and next year in Idaho, as they
Absolutely.
as they say. I'm really particularly excited to speak with Sherri and Johan. Sherri Goodman, Senior Fellow at the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program and the Polar Institute. Johan Bergenas, he's the Senior Director for Public Policy at Vulcan Inc. And the two of them recently authored a piece titled "The United States Needs a Natural Security Strategy to Regain Our Global Leadership." I'm going to read just one line from this that I thought was very powerful in outlining the threats of COVID-19. Sherri and Johan write, "This is the latest but not the last society-altering impact nature will have on geopolitics. If the United States does not take bold action now, the obituary of American global leadership will be penned in parallel with the one for the planet." Sherri, I'm going to start with you. Both of you have been involved in national security for many years. You particularly... Tell me a little bit, though, what you mean by a natural security strategy. What is it, and why do we need one?
Well, thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with the whole Sun Valley Forum. Let me say hello to all my friends. I'm sorry that we're not all together in Sun Valley this summer. Thank you, Ami, for your incredible leadership there. And I agree with you, Lisa, next summer in Sun Valley next year. So the reason we wrote this piece is and both of us have national security backgrounds, and I've been in this field for over 30 years, 8 years in the Department of Defense, also served on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and have been in national security organizations. And it's very clear that while we've recognized environment as a challenge for some time, we haven't realized fully how much our natural systems are changing and affecting what we do in national security, and that has to be part of how we construct a new narrative for global leadership and for the planet. It's environment, it's climate, it's ocean health, it's biodiversity and wildlife, and much more. But all of these systemic changes that we are now experiencing, and COVID is just one more manifestation in many ways, what we're experiencing is a result of zoonotic diseases. And so we need to understand those root causes so that we can make this very much a part of how we build back our nation better.
And Johan, can you pick up on that? You both make a direct link between the coronavirus pandemic and the threats to the planet from climate change and wildlife management. Explain how poor wildlife management exacerbated the disease transmission from animals to humans.
Yeah, two root causes of that is deforestation and climate change. And so early this afternoon, I went back to the last 5 national security strategies, and I was looking intensely about key concepts and words that has to do with our natural health. And there's been 5 in the last 20 years, and only 2 of them seriously highlight climate as a cataclysmic natural security threat to our country. And it's a little bit silly today as we are seeing 10 times more deaths from COVID than we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq. We are seeing conflicts over the health of our oceans and fish stocks worldwide, and China and the United States having tension over that. And the list goes on and on. But in our national security documents and our doctrinal statements, biodiversity and its health, ocean and its health, climate is a little bit different, but they are not fully incorporated in these documents. So we need to start to recognize that planetary health impact all of these economic and security implications for Americans, our friends and allies and adversaries as well.
And I want to come back, Johan, in a minute to the fish stocks, which I think you write about really powerfully. But Sherri, I mean, what does in your mind, what does a natural security policy look like? What are some of the tenets of it? Is this does this go beyond mentioning it? Starting to mention it again in Department of Defense documents. What are some of the nuts and bolts that you're looking for in a strong natural security policy?
Well, it starts at the top with the president's national security strategy, and it would extend to his or her key documents. The national security strategy, that's the president's document. The national defense strategy from the Department of Defense. There are comparable documents from the State Department and other key agencies, and there's also a military strategy. Now, Lisa, because you and I have worked on this. I've been deeply involved in the work to integrate climate change, in particular, into our national security planning and processes. And since 2007, when the CNA Military Advisory Board that I founded released its first report characterizing climate change as a threat multiplier, the following year, in 2008, the president's national security strategy and all of our other successive documents have included climate change as a security threat, water security, energy security. We haven't yet moved, as Johan said, to fully include all the elements of the natural system. So we haven't yet really included wildlife, zoonotic diseases, biodiversity, and oceans as also critical elements. Of course, we operate in the oceans, just for example, every day. Maritime strategy is a core component, and forward presence is a core component of our Navy. But do we think about the ocean health as integral to our national security strategy, with the global fish stocks being so gravely depleted, and the prospect that the Arctic, for example, could in the future be a place where there's increasing competition over the fish as they migrate northward. Those are the fundamental cascading risks we face that we have to integrate across all elements of our foreign policy and national security.
And I'm just curious, I mean, what's your sense of what happened to all of the gains that were made in integrating national security and climate change and biodiversity into national security documents under the Obama administration. How much of this was really baked in and hard to kill under the Trump administration, and how much of it is just lost and one would have to start from step one in a potential Biden administration?
So I want to be clear at the outset that for the most part, until recently, these efforts have been bipartisan, that some of the earliest studies that were done and ways in which climate and environment were recognized in our national security occurred during the Bush administration. So it has, for the most part, been a bipartisan effort. There's still much good work going on, I'd say, below the radar. But in this administration, climate's been a 4-letter word. So, people people have to be careful about what they do and say. There are other areas that are a little easier to work on, but still, it's in terms of water, for example, water security, and fishing.
Plastics.
No, it's not a priority. That's
right.
Top of mind. It's not part of the narrative. And it's often some little stovepipe over here that's not central to how we conceive of our foreign policy and national security. That's what we believe must change.
Just
Lisa, if I can reinforce that a little bit.
Absolutely. Give me one. I just want to interject and say, I'm going to try, I should have said this in the beginning, I'm going to try and leave, the 10 minutes or so at the end to take questions from the audience. I see some people starting to write questions in the comments, and I see them, and that's great. And Isabella is also, we have a little system set up where she's going to text me questions that I might not see on the edge. So, please don't hold back. Start asking questions, and we'll bring them up at towards the end of the panel. Johan, please follow up on the politics of the.
I was going to follow up on Sherri's point about the bipartisan nature over the last few years. There's been some seminal legislative initiatives from Senator Coons, former Senator Flake, Chairman Royce, Roger Wicker from Louisiana, and so forth, that really connects wildlife and national security, and ocean health and ocean security. So there's momentum there. What is missing is more authority for our security, intelligence, and defense services, and of course resources. And so let me give you a data point here. The U.S. security establishment have been protecting oil and gas for the past 75 years, critical to our national security. They spend about $80 billion every year and have been spending trillions over the last few decades. But we do not mobilize the same resources for other natural resources, if it's timber, if it's fish, if it's wildlife, if it's minerals, even though they have the same conflict, mass migration, instability themes to them. So that's the shift that we need to see here, from the narrative that Sherri spoke about to resources and further authority in operationalize the ideas that are largely accepted across the aisle and across the intellectual community.
So that's exactly where I was going to go next with you. I mean, you write a pretty astounding line in your piece. You said that researchers have found that between World War II and the collapse of the Soviet Union, a quarter of all militarized disputes were fought over fisheries. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I don't think people know that. I mean, tell us a little bit about how. And this is an area that I don't think I know enough about. I mean, how has competition for fish and other natural resources, how is that driving conflicts? Where is that driving conflicts? What are we going to be seeing?
Sure.
Obviously we've got the Arctic, and we'll focus on that in a moment, but yeah,
I'd like Sherri to follow up on the Arctic piece, but the short answer is that it's worldwide. And right now there are 260 big Chinese fishing vessels outside of Ecuador, outside of the exclusive economic zone there, ready to empty those waters of fish. It is happening in South China Sea. It's happening on the east and the west coast of Africa. It is happening in the Pacific. And there is a wide variety of strategic objectives that China and other countries have in terms of laying claim of these resources, not similar to how other natural resources over the decades have been very important to feed your populations, to keep them healthy and employed and whatnot. And people are calling this in the US government as well, that there is a fishing war coming, and we need to start paying attention to it and use our assets on the water and around the world to keep an eye on this and respond accordingly when countries are not staying true to their obligations.
Oh. Sherri, a few people have written in studies as much about Arctic security as you have. First, some basics. I mean, how is climate change reshaping strategic operating environments for the military in the Arctic? How are these new challenges? How are the changes creating new challenges with countries like Russia and China?
Well, climate change has, in our lifetimes, created a whole new ocean in the navigable ocean in the Arctic. 25 years ago, when I was in the Department of Defense, running a program called Arctic Military Environmental Cooperation, that was about helping the Russians reduce their waste streams from nuclear submarines that had sunk and that could have contaminated the fishing grounds of Norway and our other Scandinavian allies. And that's what Arctic military environmental cooperation meant in the 1990s, in the early post-Cold War period.
Yeah.
Today, we have Chinese vessels off the coast of Alaska in the summer conducting science and other observations. We've got Russia seeking to monetize its northern sea route that runs along its very long Arctic coastline and turn that into a shipping lane, a viable shipping lane for shipping from Asia to major ports in Europe. We've got investments, Chinese foreign direct investments in mining and energy across Russia and other Arctic nations. And we've had to learn, our own military has had to relearn how to deploy in Arctic waters, which we haven't done much since the Cold War, because of the increasing open waters. It's warming faster in the Arctic than in anywhere else on the planet. The permafrost is collapsing, which is threatening the lives of many of indigenous populations and also leading to dangerous environmental conditions, such as this very large diesel spill that's occurring in Russia now, called Norilsk, occurring in part because of collapsing permafrost and conditions where the infrastructure is not set for the changing conditions. And this is going to be a massive spill that makes the Exxon Valdez look like it was easy to clean up. So I think this is a harbinger of conditions we have to come where the pace of environmental change is exceeding that of the ability of humans to adapt. And
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met yesterday.
There are these lines here of different routes across the Arctic. I think Isabel put up a slide there, perhaps. So the Arctic open for commerce, and you can see, for those of you who are looking at the screen, you can see both the green northern sea route across Russia's Arctic coastline. You can see the Northwest Passage that runs across the U.S. and Canadian Arctic, and then eventually the transpolar route that goes directly across the North Pole that, in my view, at some point China eyes as a way to free itself from constraints either of U.S. or Russian control.
So, Sherri, particularly where China is concerned, and the promise of natural resource riches is drawing quite a lot of Chinese investment. What should the U.S. approach be?
Well, the U.S. is taking steps today to increase its presence in the Arctic, and that's what we need. We face, in some ways, a capability gap in our icebreakers, although we do have very good other military presence in the region and capability to defend and deter. But we need to up our game in terms of our icebreaking capability, and we need to re-engage with our allies and our partners across the Arctic, Canada and the Nordic nations, because that's where much of our strength comes from. It's important not to see China and Russia together as a unit in the Arctic. We need to be able to figure out we have to cooperate with them on certain dimensions, from science to early warning of particular conditions that might occur so that we don't have escalation. And it's important, most important, to really begin to move towards a clean energy future and reduce the sources that are causing us, the sources of emissions and carbon that are causing us so much future. That's important for the American economy as well, so that we can continue to be a global clean energy leader.
I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience. This first one, I think, Johan, let me start with you. We have a question. How might a natural security strategy inform individual states' wildlife management policies?
Question.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, let me see if I can get there with this analogy. After 9/11, we reorganized our homeland security and society to protect ourselves from attacks, foreign and domestic. And to this day, we're spending about $175 billion to keep our safes. When it comes to wildlife management, we are having about $125 million budget for that, which clearly does not go far when you consider the global nature of animal welfare. We have a fair amount of trafficking in our country as well, particularly tigers. We have huge concerns with our national parks, which is a major source of pride for our country that needs to be managed, documented, enforced, monitored, and whatnot. So the first thing that comes to mind is to resource, our great national parks with the capabilities that they need to keep wildlife healthy and safe, and to be the window to the American people about what well-managed wildlife can do for our country, and what the risks and the socioeconomic opportunities exist for other countries that depend on its wildlife and well-managed wildlife for economic mobility, if you will. So that would be, one slice of what needs to happen.
And Sherri, we have a question from the audience. Is there a credible domestic threat to our food security from China buying up farmland?
Okay, such a good question. China's on a global quest for all variety of resources to feed its burgeoning and billion member population. And so, as Johan said, it's got fishing fleets off Ecuador and across Africa. And it's also buying farmland in the Amazon and in the U.S., much of it for what's called virtual water, crops that can hold water, that bring back those water sources into China, which is increasingly water parched. So yes, I think we have to be concerned about their investment around the world. This raises a very important point about food security, which is that we know now that the Arab Spring uprisings were sparked in part by food shortages brought on by drought, some of it aggravated by climate, that led to major wheat growing countries like Russia and others stopping their traditional export of wheat. Russia is in the climate era. Russia is a gainer in terms of its arable farmland and will be a larger share of the global wheat market in the future. That gives me some concern about countries being able to weaponize their food supply to hold other countries at risk. We haven't seen that yet, but I'm deeply concerned that that could be a threat to. We've already seen water being weaponized in the Middle East under conditions where vulnerable populations are at risk from terrorists.
I think in the last few minutes we have left, I mean, I'd like to turn this into sort of actionable policy. I mean, in a I don't feel like I need to beat around the bush. We've got one administration that is antagonistic to climate change and climate change policies. Joe Biden recently came out with a big climate platform. The platform, it was a mostly jobs and environmental justice focused. It didn't have a ton of new details on the national security or diplomatic front. But what are some of the things that you think you would like to see front and center in a platform of a president who wanted to act on climate change, on natural security?
Well, the first thing is not only to get back into the Paris Climate Agreement, but also to restore our relations with our allies and partners, to listen to their concerns, and to rebuild that trust. Then we need to rebuild our trade relationships that are so vital. And I agree with one of the commenters that food security is a national security issue. And there's no doubt that our EU allies have long thought about their food security as a fundamental security issue for their nation. We've been blessed to take it for granted here for a long time with our abundant farmland, but it is increasingly changing, and we need to be mindful of how we work, particularly with our allies and partners whose food security is going to be increasingly at risk. We need to thread this through all parts of our trade and economic policies as we go forward, and revitalize our international institutions from the UN to others that will be part of this future governance.
Johan?
What Sherri said.
Well, then let me. Okay.
But also, I'd add one thing to that. I think that we have gotten ourselves out of trouble and grown as a country by science and technology for the last 100 years, and we must do it again. We have an enormous capability in our country to innovate around these issues, and now we need to have our government and our private technology sector go to work on that for biodiversity, for ocean health, for climate adaptation, and for climate mitigation. There is a huge opportunity to have those four economic drivers be the next generation of American leadership at home and abroad. And we just need our government and our private sector to step up to the plate here.
How do you propose getting past the credibility gap? And I guess this is for either of you. I mean, we, the United States, were the architects of the Paris Agreement, and we forced elements on other countries that, other things that other countries didn't want, and then we walked away. And by the way, we did that in the Kyoto Protocol too. So the rest of the world has kind of seen this movie twice now, right? Where the U.S. Pushes a big global climate agreement on the world, and then a new administration comes in and tosses it out. What standing does the United States even have at this point to tell anyone else what to do on climate change?
Well, we have much less than we had before. That's absolutely for sure. But there still is an interest and what we call in defense, we call demand signal, a need for that American global leadership. And just as an example, in the last year, I helped co-found a new International Military Council on Climate and Security. We have almost 40 countries represented in that, national security and military leaders from those countries, and they all want the U.S. to be at the table with them. Okay, now we have to be humble when we get back there, and we are no longer the global hegemon. For example, very concerning now is the increasing alliances between China and the EU on a variety of elements of trade and foreign policy and communications that is going to, and clean energy. Yeah. That is going to be, China is a major clean energy exporter between solar and other technologies, and we stand to lose that race if we don't get back in the game. But we need to go back and be with our partners and allies, and they want us there. They do want us there.
Well, I like ending on a note of optimism. I'm so grateful for the two of you for taking the time. I encourage all of you to read their piece in Morning Consult. I think Amy posted it in the margins there. And thank you so much. And give Sherri and Johan a virtual round of applause.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. You're a great.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Sherri. Thank you, Johan. Incredible conversations, so much depth and breadth in such a short period of time, and so much expertise to share. Really grateful to have all of you with us. Thank you, and fingers crossed for all of you being in even greater positions of influence and impact going forward, so we can get ourselves back on track into a position of leadership. So thank you again. And I'd like to invite everyone to join us for a closing session, really a summary of what we've heard this summer, the summer series, and a call to action and community, and look forward to visiting with you there. And so we will wrap up and move over to our final session, closing session. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Lisa and Johan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.